Hello and welcome to the talk entitled Pitfalls of Epistemic Uncertainty Quantification through Loss Minimization. My name is Viktor Bengs and this is a joint work together with Eike Hüllemeyer and Willem Wachermann. So there is a recent interest in the machine learning community to distinguish different types or levels of uncertainty awareness of a learner. And in the label prediction or classification setting, which is the setting we consider in our paper, one distinguishes between three levels of uncertainty awareness, and the first one is where the prediction does not report uncertainty at all, so we refer to it as the level 0 uncertainty awareness level, and this corresponds to the case where the hypothesis or the prediction is simply a hard label prediction. Yeah, so in the free class example here, the prediction is just one of the three available labels, y1, y2, y3, that's our one corner point in this triangle. The next uncertainty awareness level is when predictions are made in the form of a probability distribution over the labels, and here the idea is then that the uncertainty regarding the random outcome of the label is taken into account. Now, so in the free class example here again, the prediction corresponds to a point in the 2 simplex, which is then consequently a distribution over the 3 labels. And now one can go even one level higher and consider the case where predictions are made in the form of a distribution over all possible label distributions. So here the idea is now to take uncertainty about the underlying conditional label distribution into account, which is of course not known in advance. So we have uncertainty in this regard. Now, how can we come up with a prediction on the first level? Well, one can use the classical machine learning approach by means of empirical risk minimization, and in order to do so, one specifies a loss function with the correct signature for the underlying level 1 hypothesis space, and with this, the well-known risk of a hypothesis can be defined, which gives rise to an optimal hypothesis. However, as the risk is based on the unknown probability distribution P, and we only have access to IID data according to this distribution, we need to resort to an empirical version of the risk, which in turn gives rise to the empirical risk minimizer. That corresponds then to a level 1 prediction or hypothesis we can use in practice. And to make sure that this empirical risk minimization approach is indeed a good idea, we have to make sure that the loss function used is reasonable for our purpose. So what would be a reasonable loss function on the first level? Well, the answer is quite simple, as we only need to ensure that the optimal hypothesis coincides with the underlying conditional label distribution, because this will incentivize a learner based on the empirical risk minimization to make objectively correct predictions, as well as to report the level 1 uncertainty in a faithful manner. And fortunately, there's a well-studied class of loss function of this kind, namely the class of strictly proper scoring rules, to which the popular cross-entropy and the Breyer score belong to. Now it is tempting to leverage this empirical risk minimization approach to the next level, that is the level 2 uncertainty awareness level, by modifying the loss function appropriately. Again, one needs to address the question what a reasonable loss function would be in this case, and the intuitive answer inspired by the level 1 loss considerations is that level 2 loss function is reasonable if correct predictions are incentivized, and also the level 2 uncertainty in terms of the peakness, the level 2 prediction is reported in a faithful manner. And in the literature, there have been proposals for defining such a reasonable level 2 loss consisting of 2 components. The first component essentially averages the level 1 losses of the level 2 prediction to make sure that the predictions are correct. And the second component penalizes deviations from the uniform distribution over all possible label distributions in order to avoid that the level 2 prediction is too peaked, or in other words, too confident. So this component is intended to take care that the faithful level 2 uncertainty is reported. Now in our paper, we have raised the question whether the suggested level 2 losses are indeed reasonable from a theoretical perspective. And in order to analyze this on a theoretical basis, we translated this intuitive definition of a reasonable level 2 loss into 2 requirements, which the corresponding empirical risk minimizer, based on the data, needs to fulfill. The first one is that the reported level 2 uncertainty decreases in expectation with the number of available data. So the more data we have, the more certain we are, or the empirical risk minimizer is. And the second one is that if you have access to infinite many data points, then the level 2 distribution should be a point mass on the underlying conditional label distribution so that correct predictions are enforced. However, we have proven that the empirical risk minimizer for these suggested level 2 losses used with reasonable level 1 losses does not fulfill these requirements in general. And the reason is that either the empirical risk minimizer is too peaked and violates requirement number 1, or it does not converge at all to the point mass on the underlying conditional label distribution and therefore violates requirement number 2.